Following up on our last video and also the Galtieri biography, I didn't really go into depth on why there is such a strong contingent of North American and European-style classicalism in Chile and Argentina. For example, the recently elected president of Chile, Gabriel Boric, who descends from a South Slavic immigrant group, has, despite running on the ticket of a coalition that includes the Communist Party, advocated for libertarian economic measures. Indeed, while Boric has been quoted using revolutionary language and lexicon, he nonetheless still holds economic views more prevalent to North America and parts of Europe rather than the rest of Central and South America. His Slavic European heritage also stands out and is just one of several European groups that make the demographics of Argentina and Chile unique. This has continued to affect the course and politics of both nations. Like the rest of Central and South America, the longest-term upper class are peninsulares from Spain, such as Castilians, and their aristocratic descendants. However, at the time of Chile's founding, German and Italian mercenaries and explorers were also present, though these were later assimilated into the Chilean Castilian aristocracy. There had been various European contingents elsewhere in Central and South America prior to this. For example, in the 16th century, Venezuela, or Little Venice, Klein Venedig, was briefly a colony of Imperial Germany under the Habsburgs during its personal union with Spain. However, after the crowns of Spain and Germany were once again separated, German settlement essentially ceased, and Venezuela became assimilated into the rest of the Spanish-speaking Americas. A century after that, during the Portuguese-Dutch Wars in Brazil, numbers of German mercenaries were also used, as they were in various North American conflicts at the time, and those who stayed mostly eventually settled in the sparsely populated southern provinces of Brazil, which contains the largest German populace in Central and South America, though due to Brazil's enormous size and population, they make up only a small percentage of the total population. Later, Chilean independence hero Bernardo O'Higgins was a descendant of Irish nobility, along with the Spanish Castilian aristocracy. O'Higgins, of course, also served some of the other newly independent states. One of these, the states of the Rio de la Plata, Argentina, faced similar issues to Chile in terms of settlement. Like southern Brazil, Chile and Argentina were sparsely populated with settlers, including virtually no presence in their southern areas in Patagonia. There were also very few natives in the area. However, those who were present were mostly in the south, and as Chile and Argentina began to encourage settlement to the south, wars would break out with these Mapuches, eventually leading to many of their assimilation. However, issues between Europeans and natives in the southern regions of both countries do remain to this day. In any case, unlike Brazil, Chile and Argentina were sparsely populated even in their main metropolitan zones, and in the 19th century, large-scale settlement from various European countries began, much of which was encouraged by the Chilean and Argentine governments. In Chile, an organic movement outside of government regulation occurred of Italians to various Chilean ports, with some of them then moving inland to set up wineries and various plantations in the interior of the Chilean Central Valley. Some of these became intermingled with the Castilian aristocracy and became part of the latifundia, the country's elite of large landholders. This, along with Roman Catholicism, helped to tie the Italian community to the classicalist Chilean cause. This community eventually produced the Alessandri political dynasty, with Arturo and later Jorge Alessandri serving as president of Chile on multiple occasions. Up to 300,000 Italians and Italian descendants remain in Chile today. During the same time period in the late 19th century, up to 25,000 French people also moved to Chile. However, again, intermarriage was a main feature, and today over 800,000 Chileans claim some form of French descent. However, as far as direct French descent goes, that community has also been active in the wine country of central Chile, and thus is oftentimes part of the classicalist contingent and aligned with or part of the estate owners. Of course, one principal character of French descent, who we discussed extensively in the last video, was General Augusto Pinochet. On his mother's side, Pinochet was of Basque descent, the Basques being intermingled with the Castilian-speaking Spanish elite of the country. However, his father was a second-generation descendant of a French immigrant from Brittany. In neighboring Argentina, French and Italians made up an even larger percentage of the population. As part of the Great European Migration to Argentina, partially promoted by the state, brought hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of Italians, along with hundreds of thousands of French, to the country. Many of the Italians moved to the Buenos Aires area. In the adjacent town Caseros, General Leopoldo Galtieri was born to two first-generation Italian immigrants, his father from Genoa and his mother from Calabria. To this day, 62% of the Argentine population claims at least some form of Italian descent, and 17% claims at least some form of French descent. Another large European immigrant group in both countries are Germans. In Argentina, during that great European migration of the late 19th and early 20th century, Volga Germans were experiencing persecution in the Russian Empire, and many would take that opportunity to move to Argentina. Simultaneously, Germans also began arriving in Chile, at first largely in the port of Valparaiso, before eventually becoming contracted by the state to settle the sparsely populated southern areas. All of this helped to establish a European-style classicalism as a dominant force, with various German and French political traditions added to that of the Spanish latifundia, into which they had somewhat intermarried. As presented in the previous video, this was especially prevalent in the Chilean army, a process that began in 1858 when Chile hired French officers to conduct their military training. At the same time, Chile formed extensive naval links with Britain, a connection that would continue through the Falklands War over 100 years later. However, during the 1878-83 War of the Pacific against Bolivia and Peru, the leadership of the French-modeled Chilean army looked for new European advisors. For this, they looked to the preeminent military power of the era, the German imperial realm and its formidable Prussian army, which had once been described even during Prussia's more modest days as, quote, an army with a state. This changed the character of European classicalism in Chile from one of a more Enlightenment-based egalitarian character to a more rigid and absolutist character. After limited numbers of German advisors helped the Chileans emerge victorious in the War of the Pacific, the Chileans in 1886 hired Captain Emil Kerner to lead a contingent of 36 Prussian officers who would subsequently run the military academy at Santiago de Chile, eventually handing off to Chilean officers, but not before the Chilean army essentially became a South American copy of the Prussian army, wearing the same dress and field uniforms, playing Prussian and German military marches, and adopting Prussian military drill. This was embraced fully during the Pinochet era, with the general even bringing back some of the more eccentric elements of Prussian military style, such as the military cloak or cape for officers, and of course the general himself, something that's, however, Chile under Pinochet continued to resemble aesthetically, but also politically, the pre-World War I German realm, with Pinochet's classicalist dictatorship essentially imitating the classicalist absolute monarchy of Prussia, with its martial culture and firmly classicalist traditions. Thus, the 1980 Constitution promulgated by Pinochet is an extension of this classicalist philosophy, at least in style, while the large European-descended population of the country, many of whom were deeply invested in the classicalist economy, were more familiar with and more prepared for the newer economic ideas, largely from Britain and America, put in place by the Pinochet regime and the 1980 Constitution. That familiarity and comfortability with the ideas, along with economic success, was one reason why the previous Constitution had such vocal support, along with Pinochet's continued presence for a while as essentially head of state emeritus, and why the issue of throwing out that Constitution and the Chilean model remains such a hot conflict today, with many European-descended conservatives strong in their convictions, while of course their sometimes revolutionary opponents are just as zealous. In any case, Chile's martial culture and Prussian classicalist traditions lay at the heart of the matter. Over in Argentina, during the Great European Migration to the country, the aforementioned Volga Germans immigrated, but so did a large contingent of immigrants from Germany proper. Although the Argentine army and military didn't have the same connection to Prussia that Chile did, it still tried to largely model itself in many ways off of the German army and maintained a policy of neutrality throughout the First World War. During the Second World War, the German speakers of both Chile and Argentina would come under influence operations from Berlin, attempting to merge them into essentially a German puppet party, a strategy followed with other German-speaking minorities around the world. As the Germans were losing the war, two concerns came to the forefront for many Germans, Italians, and Austrians, namely retribution by the Soviet Union or possible prosecution by America and Britain. Although many German officers assumed there would not be any prosecution put forth by America and Britain, who they assumed would want to work with the now defeated German army against the Soviet Union, but eventually rumors got got out that the Americans and British were going to put on a war crimes trial which the Soviets would participate in, and with the writing on the wall, many began to plan their escapes from the continent. Although some Germans and Italians fled to Chile, a majority went to Argentina, with de facto and later official Argentine leader Juan Perón admiring the German army's Prussian classicalist traditions, along with Germany's martial spirit and absolutist, later dictatorial, political culture. Although Germany itself dropped much of this under American encouragement during this time, Argentina, like Chile, continued to be a bastion of old Prussian traditions, and with Perón's encouragement became a haven for hardline classicalists and even fascists fleeing from Europe. This was done with the help of the, at first largely secretive operations of allied Spain and Italy, with Spain of course still retaining a classicalist fascist regime under the Generalissimo Francisco Franco, and Italy, although about to drop the monarchy in the midst of a fight against internal communists. However, as the Cold War set in, the differences between the classicalists of America and Britain, who preached a less authoritarian version of classicalist politics, and their certainly more extreme former enemies in Germany and Italy, became less, as the Soviet Union and its agents became the primary enemy of all classicalist factions. Thus, as the American-aligned classicalist dictatorships emerged in Chile and Argentina, intelligence came from the regime in Spain, which essentially served as the main go-between for these South American regimes in the outside classicalist world, with this continuing even after Franco's death in 1975 and the restoration of the Spanish monarchy under King Juan Carlos I of Bourbon. Due to these regimes' controversial histories, their place in the classicalist world has sometimes been questioned, but their context within the Cold War makes the extremely polarized politics of the era more understandable. We've certainly entered a new era of polarization and global ideological conflict today, though hopefully one that will not end in such violence and zealotry on each side. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to check out the project that forms the basis for these videos at apoliticalworldmap.org. Make sure to like and subscribe, comment on the video. If you can, donate on Patreon. And thanks again for watching. I'm Alex. I am out.